Both were calling on President Clinton to resign over the Monica Lewinsky scandal. McCollum is now running for governor in Florida. In the spirit of the times, I asked both men if they ever had extramarital affairs.
Well, can I ask you, Congressmember McCollum, in the spirit of peephole politics that we all seem to be engaged in right now, are you now or have you ever been involved in an extramarital sexual affair?
No, ma'am. I'm not, and I'm not at this present time involved in anything whatsoever, have not been. And I'm not going to get involved in that kind of discussion. You know, I think this is really crazy what they did with Henry Hyde yesterday. I think that's very unfortunate.
Revealing that he had a sexual affair. But
yes,
isn't this what we have come to? I mean, isn't this seem to be the question now that everyone will ask every person who gets involved with public life is start off with this question?
Unfortunately, that's true, but that's not what this issue is about. The issue in the case of President Clinton is not about sex. It's not about a sexual affair. It's about lying under oath in a court proceeding.
Congressmember McCollum, we're also joined by Republican Congressmember Mark Souter of Indiana. And while we do want to go back to the issue of the Drug Act that was passed yesterday, let me ask you if you think that that's a fair question now to ask each public official, is to start off by saying, are you now or have you ever been involved in an extramarital sexual affair?
You're asking me that or you're asking Souter that?
I'm asking Congressmember Souter that. Congressmember Souter? Are you there? I think he's just dropped off the line.
Well, and I'm going to have to drop off the line. Unfortunately, I have to go and be in a committee hearing which deals with the very subject of the matter of the presidency that we're talking about. So I've enjoyed being with you, but I got to go do that.
That was Congressmember McCollum, and before that, that was not Congressmember Souter. He was on the line, but he dropped off when I asked him if he was having or had ever had an extramarital affair. Well, today, it looks like Congressmember Souter is formally resigning for having an extramarital affair. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
And welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. By a 59-39 vote, the Senate passed a sweeping reform of financial regulation last night that has been described as the biggest overhaul of financial rules since the 1930s. The bill passed largely along party lines. Two Democratic senators, Russ Feingold of Wisconsin and Laura Cantwell of Washington, voted no, saying the bill does not go far enough to prevent another economic meltdown. 4 Republicans voted in favor: Senator Susan Collins and Olympia Snowe of Maine, Scott Brown of Massachusetts, and Charles Grassley of Iowa. Among its provisions, the legislation creates a new Bureau of Consumer Financial Protection within the Federal Reserve to help prevent abusive lending by mortgage and credit card companies. It establishes a new Council of Systemic Risk Regulators to help prevent companies from becoming too big to fail. And for the first time, the Government Accountability Office will be empowered to do a one-time audit of the Federal Reserve. The federal government will be given the power to seize and liquidate failing financial companies without the need for more bailouts. And some new regulations will be placed on the derivatives markets, hedge funds, and credit rating agencies. President Obama praised the legislation on Thursday.
Reform I sign will not stifle the power of the free market. It will simply bring predictable, responsible, sensible rules into the marketplace. Unless your business model is based on bilking your customers and skirting the law, you should have nothing to fear from this legislation. As we continue to emerge from this recession, this reform is one important step that will strengthen our economy.
Washington's Democratic Senator Maria Cantwell voted against the bill after saying it does not do enough to regulate derivatives trading.
We're still having this debate here about whether we're going to have clearing of these derivatives. To me, it's critical. I know there's other good parts of this legislation that people care deeply about. But if you have this $600 trillion market and you are not truly going to have exchange trading and clearing and aggregate position limits across all exchanges, you are not going to rein in the derivatives problem. You're not. This issue is a fundamental one. We won't have reform if we don't have exchange trading and clearing, if we don't bring derivatives onto the same kind of mechanisms we have for other products in the financial markets. And if we don't do that, then I don't know what we're doing out here in the context of what brought us to this crisis. Trading of dark market derivatives is what has brought this challenge to our U.S. economy. Let's bring some transparency into that market. Let's adhere to these words and actually implement this so we can move on with this legislation.
The financial regulatory bill now appears headed to a House-Senate conference committee where lawmakers will work to resolve differences between the two chambers. The House of Representatives passed a similar bill 6 months ago. Lawmakers are expected to come under intense pressure from Wall Street lobbyists to weaken parts of the bill in committee. According to an analysis by the Center for Public Integrity, 850 businesses, trade groups, and other corporate interests have hired more than 3,000 lobbyists to shape the bill. That's roughly 5 lobbyists for each member of Congress. To talk more about the legislation, we're joined by economist Max Fraud-Wolf. He's an economist and frequent contributor to the Huffington Post and other publications. What about this bill, and what about what Senator Cantwell just said, that it doesn't go far enough?
I think Senator Cantwell makes a series of good points. I do think there's a tectonic shift toward greater regulation of derivatives. I do think that having a regulated market with a clearing process and public information is a step forward. But even already, there are loopholes in here that you could probably sort of squeeze a large truck through. And that's before the reconciliation process, which will be dominated or at least heavily massaged and influenced by that small army of lobbyists that you just referenced. So I understand her frustrations, although I'm not sure that it makes the bill devoid of any benefit or any forward movement.
Now, President Obama, in hailing this, has said that the banks were not able to get what they wanted. But in reality, it appears that at least in certain areas, the administration is continuing to support changes to now, as we go into the reconciliation process, that the banking industry wants. Could you talk about some of those?
Sure. I mean, I think that there were a few amendments in the Senate, sort of the Kaufman-Brown, maybe most famously, or the reinstatement of Glass-Steagall. And there were certain provisions in the original House version, excuse me, that passed in December that were the most fearsome and disliked by Wall Street, let's say. And the administration has generally pushed to get rid of those provisions least liked by the big banks and to move it toward a more moderate centrist position, which is much more palatable both to the 4 Republicans we saw vote for it and also to the banking industry. The banking industry has less to fear and more to like in the version that we saw pass last night than the version we saw come out of Barney Frank's committees in the House in December of last year.
Now, one of those, isn't it, is